seeing on the screen here the negative words that people are associating with food poverty, and this is great. I saw this Mentimeter word cloud thing used the other day, and I think it's great. It's a really nice interactive tool for single words and thoughts and perceptions, and yeah, there's some really powerful words there: handout, hopeless, exclusion, inequality, expensive, homelessness, unhealthy, lack of money, poor, hungry. I mean, I guess if people are put, usually with a word cloud, the more people that put it in, the bigger it gets. So hungry, shame, poor, loss of dignity, worried, lack of education, limitation, lack of resources, lack of support, exclusion, hopeless, struggling, food banks, poor nutrition, in need. Gosh, I mean, even just saying the words makes me feel really sad. And it just every time I see and the these types of words, I feel quite overwhelmed, and I think we all feel the same. I think that's part of the issue that we're facing. There's more coming in, which is great. Um, Embarrassment, lack of support. Does anyone have any reflection on what they're seeing on the screen here? Any comments that people want to make at this stage?
Very sad just to look at as a kind of summary of what people living in food poverty experience. Yeah, it's quite shocking, really.
Yeah, it's I think it's a real harsh reality, and when you look at that, you don't feel any sort of positive feelings at all. And I almost, I feel emotional actually. And I mean, these are the words that are quite often that we see are bandied about around this agenda, around this topic. So when you think about the lived experience, it becomes extremely challenging to think that these words are associated with that experience. Any other comments at all at this stage before we move on to the next stage?
I think they're words we should not be seeing in a society like ours. This should be alien to us, but it's not.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, Anya. Yeah. In our so-called civilized society, that they're even in our vocabulary at all is quite, and that shame, the shame and the hungry and the stigma, etc., come out quite prominently. Well, that's fantastic. It's still, are people still adding words? It keeps moving around. It's great. Oh, I like this little tool. I like a little game. It's always good to find a new tool. So I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I think that was a really good start to what we're trying to do today. And what I would like to do now is I'm going to hand over. No, actually, I'm going to share this screen again. Sorry, I've got too many things to open and open and close. This slide here is from the Food Ethics Council, which I thought was really useful in terms of thinking about language and those words that we've just seen on the word cloud. Language has tremendous power. It does more than just communicate information. It engages us in many ways, leading to a multitude of conscious and unconscious responses. And I think that's a really good place to start. This isn't about me droning on for the next hour, you'll be glad to hear, because we've had a few people across the region that have agreed to say a few words about their experience. Now, there's been no cherry picking involved. My intention was to try and get a perspective from different sectors. So I asked a few people to say a few words, and that there's no formality about this, and everybody will get the opportunity to say something. I just felt that I was trying to cover all bases. And I imagine there's going to be crossover. I imagine there's going to be similar experiences, but I thought it was just a good starting point to get a very short 3 minutes, 4 minutes, nothing formal from the individuals that I've spoken to. And then once everybody's said their bit, then perhaps we can hear from others and get other people's perspective. So I'll just take the screen off sharing at the moment so that I can see all your lovely faces. So Ruby, do you want to start? Sorry to throw you right in.
That's okay, that's fine. Yeah, so sorry Claire, I've been a bit rubbish with preparing anything, but I'm just going to talk about my experience and hope that it's helpful. So I'm Ruby Entwistle, I work for the public health team in Devon County Council. And I've been working in food poverty probably the last 5 years, really. And when I first started working in it, it was mostly the term food poverty that was used and holiday hunger, and that was very much the focus. And I'd say most of my conversations really were with third sector organisations and with public health team members as well. But I think it's changed quite significantly since then, and many more people acknowledge it as an issue, and obviously most significantly since COVID has hit, and it has brought much more sort of deliberation and complexities around the terminologies used. And I was reflecting about it earlier, and I thought actually really probably what I mean is that the public sector has become to acknowledge it much more, and that's probably where I've had to really think about the terminology I'm using and change the way I'm describing what I feel really passionate about. So there's been lots more collaboration around food more generally as a topic, and early this summer I tried to put a paper together about food poverty is what I first titled it. Then I changed to food insecurity. I just want to quickly share, can I share my screen? Oh no, I'm not able.
I
can change that if you like.
Okay, it's not urgent. I was just going to, I mean, if you can do it while I'm talking, that's great, but I was just going to show sort of what I used to outline my thinking.
You should be able to do it now.
Okay, great, thank you. So I imagine some of you might have seen this before, so I've been trying to share it as a way to advocate for its consideration more within my team, mostly. So I really wanted to get across in this paper that food insecurity, as I termed it in there, is much more than just this end of the scale about experiencing hunger and that severe food insecurity, but it's much broader than that, and there's much more implications around, you know, not just undernutrition but malnutrition, you know, access to good quality food, and also sort of the mental health impacts that come alongside people who are experiencing food insecurity and the pressures that brings. So yeah, so that's what I started using it for, and then recently we had a notice of motion raised by one of our councillors, and she termed it food justice. So I was asked to help write a paper in response to that, and we used some of the you know definitions that I'd used within my paper, but I quite quickly realised that those terms don't resonate so well within local politics as they do with myself and the networks I've been working with to date. So I've had to do quite a lot more thinking around the terms, and having been involved in some COVID related urgent work and potential EU exit discussions, definitions had to evolve again. So we had to focus very much and be clear about, sometimes we're talking about people in poverty, and sometimes we're talking about people who have a temporary inability to access food. So at the moment around isolation or shielding. So being quite clear about the poverty and the access being two quite different issues. And so that notice of motion that was titled Food Justice has evolved to be called food resilience. Now, I actually really like this term because it incorporates many of the food related aspects I think we want to see from local food system. But I'm actually quite wary as well that there's an issue there that food poverty can just disappear within the breadth of that topic. So just lastly, really, Claire, you asked how to reframe the narrative to better align with the concept of food citizenship. I do wonder about using food resilience and taking that systems approach could be one way to achieve that. Because if we're examining a food system as a whole, rather than looking at different aspects in isolation, we can explore a system that works better and makes sense for all of us for the health of people and planet, which could bring some, some fantastic creative and non-discriminatory work and approaches. But I think that we always need to have some advocates for inequalities and social justice, or even better, voices of those experts by experience. So that's all really I wanted to say. I hope it was helpful. Yeah.
No, fantastic, Ruby. That's really, really useful as a starting point. Thank you so much. Lucy, can we go on to you next?
Yeah, sure. Mine won't be quite so nicely succinct as that, as I have also been a little unprepared. I've just had a few thoughts. I jotted down a few notes before coming here. So just to give a bit of introduction, I'm the community manager for Feeding Bristol, but I've been in post for now probably not even 2 months. So things are still quite fresh for me. Before this, I was doing my PhD at Swansea. I was looking at food insecurity and food aid use in Bristol. So while I'm fresh to the organisation, I've actually been studying this for the last 4 years. And so I kind of come at this from probably part of my own reflections through my PhD, but also through what we've been talking about in our organisation ourselves. So like Ruby was talking about, food insecurity is not just about crisis response, but I quite like the different uses of food insecurity and food poverty, because I feel like personally food poverty is more entrenched. It's talking about something longer standing, bigger problems that are, need a really big wraparound response. You can use them in different ways. Like food insecurity, I quite like to describe the precarity associated with unexpected crisis, which can sometimes be temporary. So just to think about poverty a bit, I know that there are benefits to differentiating between different aspects of poverty as well, such as the commonly used terms such as like fuel food or period poverty, which describe certain aspects of poverty in ways that can make it can elicit a lot of understanding with people and can elicit empathy, and people can respond to that in a better way. While poverty is often something that people think of in like an international scale, they think about it as being somewhere else, not being in the UK. And actually, it can be a disassociation between that terminology and how people think about our society. But I also think that the use of the term poverty, at least in academia, has been quite powerful, because it's actually really confronting this is what it is. We need to confront it. And it's not a matter of insecurity a lot of the time, but a longer term entrenched problem. But I found that when dealing with, that sounds really negative, when talking to different charities and in particular frontline food aid responders, I find that providers often don't use terminologies at all. They don't really use food insecurity, they don't use food poverty, or at least where they can avoid it. And I think the reason for that is that they're so used to not using these terminologies with their service users or clients that, they just refer to them, had someone refer to it as, oh, I don't talk about this food insecurity, food poverty, like I talk about that they're people that are struggling to get by at the moment. And we just need to remember that and stop seeing them as a group of people in a way, which was interesting, but I think that, it has its uses. But people, the organisation that I've worked with, at least, they prefer to use terms like low income, though obviously that's not very clear. So I'm just thinking about what else we've been talking about. So it's interesting, Ruby, that you brought up food justice, because as an organisation, we're sort of in a transitional period. So Feeding Bristol's, I don't really like the term, but we're an umbrella organisation. We're sort of the middlemen, I guess. We provoke conversations and action with different organisations in the city. So we're kind of like a go-to organisation if you want to get advice or support with expanding your remit. And well, that's how we work in Bristol, though other feeding sites in the country work differently. But we've gone through a bit of a transition recently where myself and our director are new to the organisation. I come from, academic background, and the director comes from having been running an organic farm for the last 7 years. So we come from a very different place, and actually our tagline for our organisation is, until now, been tackling food insecurity, which sounds very offensive. I don't know, I don't like it. I really don't like it. It sounds really negative and just very specific, but also doesn't really give you much idea of how you're doing it or what the purpose of your organisation is. So we're sort of working, our new tagline, or at least we're thinking about changing it to working together for food justice, which for us feels very positive and active. We've had a few comments that it's a bit too activist, but I think we are that way inclined, at least. So it's interesting just to hear that you found that it didn't really resonate in the political sector, that in the realm of politicians and people in the council, I'd imagine as well, because we've had similar feedback. So we're sort of still deliberating on that. What else was I going to say? Oh yeah, also we are in the process of working with the council on a food equalities action plan and strategy, which threw up a few interesting questions. In particular, I've never really, obviously I've touched on this idea of definitions with my PhD, but I've never thought about it in terms of actually having a city-wide understanding of what these things mean in order to, really realign your focus. And so it's really thrown up a lot of issues because, when talking about food poverty and food insecurity, I think I read the same document on this written by the council, and they'd used food insecurity / food poverty the whole way through. And it was just like, but what do you mean? Like, what are you trying to say here? They kind of do indicate different things, and there's no clarity. So we're having a workshop next week actually to talk about what food equality means and what does food poverty, and touching on these kind of terminologies to try and gain some consensus. So I might actually be in touch with, I noticed that Lisa and Vicky are from the Food Equalities Project, so I'd probably quite like to talk to you guys about it at some point. But really, the reason why I have an interest in talking about terminology is that we're in the middle of this. We're trying to deliberate all of these ourselves at the moment, so it'd be really helpful. So thanks for having me. Sorry for the rambles, but it's where my mind is at the moment.
No, I'm totally with you on that, Lucy. I know you emailed before, and I was thinking, gosh, I think we're all in the same boat. Everyone's really busy, and I just really appreciate you being here at all. And that was fantastic, actually, Lucy. And what a great start. I think I never expected that today would be about reaching any consensus. I think I just wanted to get people talking, really, as I think that's really important. And we can talk about the Food Equality Project. And interestingly, in Plymouth, excuse me, before Christmas last year, there was a Food Justice Select Committee that was set up in Plymouth, which was quite a prominent event before Christmas last year, which I shared quite a lot of evidence at, including some of the food equality outputs, and there's the documentary film that I produced last year. And I think that whole area of food justice is very similar, but it was predominantly politically a Labour side of things. Obviously, I'm not going to get into the political dialogue here, but and that's kind of moved into other areas of work now around COVID, because COVID kind of shifted things quite considerably. But it's interesting that it's kind of it was promoted, and then it kind of just became a little bit quiet on the whole food justice side of things. So it's very interesting. Okay, Rebecca, can I ask you to speak, please?
Thanks very much. Can I share my screen? Oh, great, thank you. I've only got a couple of slides. Oops, hang on, get back to the start. Okay, so yeah, it might look like I'm really well prepared, but no, I'm not really. So thanks very much for inviting me to share my thoughts. I actually, when you first asked me, I was thinking, oh my goodness, that sounds very sort of academic and maybe a bit dry, but actually I thought, no, it's a really, really positive thing to think about. And it's sort of shaped my journey working with partners and in the academic field as well. So just in case people don't know me, I'm a trustee of Food Exeter, but I'm also an academic working at the University of Exeter, and I've been working in the food field probably for about the last 4 years, very much focused on the Southwest. But with another hat, I'm a secretary of a national research group for the Royal Geographical Society on food, which is how I know Lucy. And I think what I just wanted to share today was it made me sort of reflect on how I've come to learn about different terms. There's so many different sectors. So when I first started thinking about these issues, and I was very much using the term food poverty at that time, I guess it'd be back sort of like 2014, 2015. And in my field, it seemed to be that was the term we used. And then I came across, to be honest, I find Twitter a really, really useful space for learning about people's position on terminologies. And I came across the work of Dr. Megan Blake from Sheffield University. And she shared, she's brilliant, she's a brilliant blogger, she shares quite regular updates. So she shared a blog in 2014 about we need to talk about hunger. And I'm pretty sure she had another blog which I couldn't find when I just had a quick look back for it. She really likes to make people think about what terms you're using and why you're using them. And using terms such as food poverty can become, unfortunately, a bit like a smokescreen. It can almost sort of become like a thing. It's like an entity. It's separate from other systemic or systems issues. And so she was very much highlighting that when we're talking about food poverty, it can become a bit of a smokescreen away from people's experiences of hunger. So I found that really, really useful. And I began working with partners, practitioners, Food Exeter in the Southwest. And I was very aware that my research partners, my collaborators were all using the term food poverty. And yet in the academic field, everyone was debating what should we use. But again, as an academic working alongside partners, I didn't feel it was my place to be telling people you should use this term or you should use that term. So I would happily author reports with partners using the term food poverty, but in my own academic work, I'd be using, I guess, the term food insecurity. But But as other people have already highlighted, there's been such a sort of fertile amount of thinking around these terms. And I was then invited to a conference on food justice. So again, it's thinking about why would we use the term justice as opposed to equalities. And I think it is interesting to think about these things. And at the end of the day, probably everyone on this call, I imagine everyone on this call, is working towards addressing issues of equity and trying to support the people we work with and the people we work alongside to be able to have greater agency and to feel a sense of empowerment, so that, as Lucy and Ruby both we're talking about, people are able to access food. It isn't just an issue of poverty. But again, when we talk about food access, that can have a number of different understandings, and it can also be seen within the context of like food deserts. So do you live near a great big supermarket that has a huge aisle of fresh food, or do you live near a corner shop that only sells chocolate, crisps and magazines, you know? So I think these different terms can have different, they can have validity in different contexts when we're talking about different things. But I do agree that food poverty is perhaps not fit for purpose. And this image on this slide was from the Food Exeter Food Poverty Summit from 2018. And again, I'm sort of sharing that image because it's another space where I've been able to learn from other people and to develop my own understandings by really listening to what practitioners, politicians, people with lived experiences, the different terms that they're using and why they're using them. So yeah, no, I don't think it's really fit for purpose. And because I think the term food poverty, like I said, it makes it sound like it's a thing, it's an entity, and in the public realm, there would be an understanding that food poverty is a thing that is addressed by the work at food banks. So it kind of, by looking at it that way, it sounds like a self-perpetuating process. So by looking at it that way, we're not addressing critical issues of equity or critical structural issues that are actually creating the poverty in the first place. So I think it's, and you know, as everyone here knows, and what we shared in our findings at the Food Summit as well was, you know, food poverty and food insecurity are born out of the impacts of welfare reform, insecure employment, and now the further devastating effects of COVID-19. And as Ruby said, it may be about poverty, but it also may be about people who haven't got access to food. So I think, yeah, we definitely need to reframe food insecurity as an issue of hunger, as an issue of poverty, and as well as other people's experiences of challenges in accessing food. So I think considering terminologies is a dynamic area, and I enjoy learning from other people. And recently I find Twitter a great space for learning about these things, and I've been following people like Helen Barnard from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation and Graham Witham from the Greater Manchester Poverty Action. So they've been using the term food support, and I think that's a nice, really simple term that can be used, but it's just one of many. But I think Helen in particular has been working to unpack the ideas of reframing poverty for all the reasons that other people have already mentioned, so that we understand the spectrums of people's experiences and the underlying causes. So I think it is a really dynamic area, and I think there's lots of opportunities for learning from others. So yeah, this image has got an image from our report that we produced from our research in 2018. So in that report, we've used the term food poverty, but a paper I wrote in an academic field linked to that research, I'm talking about household food insecurity, I believe I use that term. But, you know, household food insecurity, as I've just proven, is a mouthful and it's difficult. So I think it's a really important area. In my lecturing this term, I've been drawing from Julian Ageman's ideas of just sustainabilities. And I think that is a useful framing as well, because it's understanding that issues of sustainability aren't just about issues of the environment, they're also about issues of justice that are perhaps historic and ongoing in our communities. Food citizenship, I think, is another really useful term, and I'd be fascinated to read a bit more about the stuff coming out from the Food Equality Project in Plymouth, and I'd be really keen to hear more about that. But again, that it's just, I guess we end up with terms that have been slightly co-opted in different fields, so it's a lot for us to think about, and yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing other people's views on this and to continue learning from you all.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. That was really, really useful. And I deliberately felt that having that kind of academic perspective might be useful. That was great, Rebecca. And it's raised a few questions about what we mean by food citizenship, which is useful because we will come on to that a bit later. Matthew, I noticed you've just appeared. Do you want to say something? We just throw a baptism of fire. Do you want to say anything, or would you rather not? I don't want to throw you in.
I mean, you did give me a heads up. Hi, everybody. I'm sorry I was late. I was being disorganised. I'm from Cornwall, and I've been a little bit involved with quite a few of you on different things. Yeah, very hard act to follow. I'm really glad I caught I hope the substantial bits of Rebecca's presentation there. Very hard act to follow, and I'm sorry to have missed Ruby and Lucy before, but. Look, my epiphany was reading Andy Fisher's Big Hunger, and I would recommend that to those of you who haven't already read it. It's compelling, it's encyclopedic, but he makes a very simple point, which is that poverty is a matter of economic choice, political and economic choice, and that what we've been calling food insecurity is a function of that, and that actually in America, some of the biggest authors of food insecurity, of household food insecurity, are big food companies themselves. So he makes there's a circle there. So you know, I was lucky enough to meet Andy and have a few beers with him around the occasion of the launch of that book, and so he's deep inside my head. So that's where I start. I think poverty itself is a word which I've had a relationship with for a long time, and most recently with 15, focusing on poverty of opportunity. So the right to live a good life, if you like, and the right to have aspirations. And I think, yeah, we shouldn't be supporting or colluding in the splintering of poverty definitions, you know, food poverty, fuel poverty, etc. I think poverty is poverty. What's quite interesting, I don't know if you've noticed, my friends at Crowdfunder have just started a campaign with Trussell Trust and Fair Share, and Crowdfunder's leveraged loads of JC Decow advertising hoardings all over the country. So you're starting to see adverts now, and the hashtag is 14 million. And they're not using the word poverty, or sorry, they use the word poverty, but they don't say food poverty. And they're saying 14 million people will not be able to afford to eat well this winter. I mean, go and look it up. It's on Twitter and everywhere else. And so that's, I think poverty in the public imagination is very powerful and compelling. It's also a relative status, and to have effectively a quarter of the country's population earmarked as in poverty, I think it's quite an interesting moment for the country as a whole, and it's certainly one that the elites won't support. So I think we have got a bit of a bun fight on our hands. In terms of changing the language, I think Rebecca's absolutely right to pursue that in an academic setting. I think in more public-facing community settings, poverty is very emotive and people understand it. And the food bank to tackle food poverty makes perfect sense to a whole bunch of people who might be giving food or volunteering or raising money. And I wouldn't want to alienate any of those people by trying to ban the term. So I think we have to recognise that language is always flawed. And Rebecca's right. If we can just get the thinking and analysis done so that we we know the language we should be heading to, and I think that language is of food justice and food citizenship, then we can tolerate various usages of phrases which we're less comfortable with on the way through. In Cornwall, a few of us have set up the Cornwall Food Access Alliance. We recognise the problems of the word access, but it was talk about food aid. Food access made it sound, we felt, less personalised. It's less like it's your problem, it's more like it's food's problem kind of thing. So it was meant to be more enabling and empowering as a label. So that's what we're calling ourselves at the moment, the Cornwall Food Access Alliance. And I think, that when I first tackled food poverty with the mission statement, it was, I went for the inverse, and I said, let Cornwall be a food wealthy place. And recognising that Cornwall has got great food assets and food networks, then shouldn't we be working together to make sure we fed food wealth? So I tried to turn it on its head. That always sat a little bit uneasily with me, and I haven't really gone on about that so much more lately. But so I think I missed the first two speakers, unfortunately. I caught the end of Rebecca. I'd agree with everything I heard Rebecca say, and I would just encourage people to look at big hunger and to understand systemic reasons. But I would no longer fight for a banner of food poverty, because I think it is as Andy Fisher enjoins us to do, any food activist who is not campaigning against poverty is not trying to address the root cause. They're only trying to address the symptoms. Thank you. That's
brilliant. Thanks so much, Matthew. And I feel quite privileged that you're here, because I know how busy you are. So thank you for spending the time. And in fact, Andy Fisher actually came down to Plymouth to talk a few years ago at the launch of his book. And we went out for a beer and a meal, and it's utterly fascinating. And you're absolutely right. It's well worth the read, folks. If you haven't read it. I mean, I think that the infrastructure in the US is slightly different, but it's quite shocking. And I refer to his work quite a lot in some of the critique I do around all these.
I think, sorry, Claire, just to interject there, I think you just make a really important point. The infrastructure in the States is different. The warning I take from it, and from the conversations I had with Andy when he was here, is that is currently our road, and Brexit accelerates that road. If we're not careful, that's what the future looks like. We end up with, I don't know how much Emma pays herself at Trussell Trust. I'm sure it's modest in keeping, but I've got a good sense of Lindsay's career, who's now running FareShare, and we are into the land of six-digit charity CEOs, six-digit salary CEOs running great big food poverty outfits. So I think we are well on the way down the road of America, and I think we just need to look at the Canadian. Anyway, I've made the point. I think read Andy if you want to see what to avoid in the future.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. So it's worth, if you haven't read Andy's work. I mean, I've put the link. There's quite a useful website that goes alongside the book, and he's written quite a lot in relation to COVID that kind of supports a lot of the work he wrote in Big Hunger. So we've got one more. Daisy, do you want to add anything, Daisy?
That's quite a set to follow, isn't it? I can add some things. So I'm the Community Food Coordinator for Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Council. I'm going to say BCP Council because that's a right mouthful. So if you hear BCP Council, that's what I mean, Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole. And my role as Community Food Coordinator came out of an event last year, which was a collaborative event between Dorset Council, BCP Council and Public Health Dorset, which was called Dorset Hidden Hunger. So it was an event that was looking at the issue of hidden hunger in Dorset and how do we work collaboratively to respond to those who are hungry and we don't know about them. And so there the emphasis in the language was very much around food insecurity and how do you communicate the support that is available around food and make that available to those who are hidden. And I think one of the things that's really come out of, especially, the last 10 months and COVID being what it is that there are, the term that we found in terms of food poverty can make it seem like food poverty is something that is over there and it happens to other people. And it's not something that impacts like the swathes of society with just one unexpected bill or one, unexpected life event or a loss of a job. And the the fact is that loads of people are finding themselves in a place that they've never expected themselves to be in. And so, yeah, the food, I appreciate the term food insecurity, because yes, it describes those people can be in that if they are in a situation that's slightly more longer term, but also it can be for those people who have literally just hit crisis in a moment and they've never experienced this before. And so yesterday we did a load of sessions with all of the schools in Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole, talking about community food support that's available and looking in the run up to Christmas, and how can we make sure that schools are communicating well to those people who may find themselves in crisis because they've been furloughed or they've lost their job and made redundant, and something that's very new. And one of the things that came back to us that was a real surprise was that actually in some of the much more affluent areas, and I remember when we were having the planning meeting, we're like, oh, there's someone from Lilliput here. I wonder, how much of an issue is food insecurity in Lilliput? And they were saying on these calls that we were hosting about community food support was that they had people who would normally be here in high-flying jobs, and literally one of them was telling a story of a woman who came to ask for help, and she was an air host whose job had gone, and big mortgage, lots of payments to keep up with, and they were finding themselves in crisis and needed to know where they could get help with putting food on the table. And those people who find themselves in that situation would not necessarily go and access support that's available to them because of the stigma of poverty, or it's not for me, it's for someone else who's in a much worse situation. And so trying to communicate that support that's available has been, a real challenge because these people aren't coming forward. And so I'm someone who I love a metaphor, and I've really appreciated, it's been mentioned before, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation report on the language we use around poverty. I think it came out in 2018, and using the metaphor of the sea and currents. I live in Bournemouth, so obviously I'm going to be attracted to a sea-based metaphor. And everyone can relate to having to stay afloat, or the potential of going under, or feeling overwhelmed and being swept away by a current they can't control. So it's that universal metaphor that makes it more relatable. And so I really appreciate the power that has to make everybody feel like, oh, that's how I feel. I need to be able to connect to support. So and one of the things that we've been working with as a council is how do we make sure that using that kind of language and the principles based off of that report, and using that in our comms, anything that we do around community support or communicating issues around food insecurity, that we're using those principles to make sure that we're communicating things well. So and I think the language around food poverty also impacts the way that support is given as well, because it's easy to respond with handouts because poverty is talking about the symptom, as people have mentioned before, and not necessarily the cause. Which I think why food justice is a really interesting term. And when the cause becomes part of the language, like with the sea metaphor, the sea is our societal system or whatever it is, and then you can ask the questions around how do we stop the sea levels rising, or what is this riptide and how are we going to slow it down, or where's the boat, and then that's starting off that interesting conversation, especially with projects who are on the ground who might have we're dealing with poverty, here's our standard response, but kind of shifting the conversation to looking at that more holistic view and looking at how do we respond to those causes as well. And I really appreciate the positive approach, looking at where do we want to get to and talking about that. So in BCP, we've been working for the last 8 months on the Access to Food Forum, so gathering community food projects from all over the conurbation, and then schools and GPs and social prescribers and officers in the council who are able to kind of influence changes, council members, etc. And we've pulled together a charter. And our vision for that is we want to have a Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole where everybody is able to feed themselves and their family nutritious food all of the time. That's our goal. And communicating that in terms of the imagining the place where we want to be and channeling towards that and using that in our language as much as possible has been a real shift, which is I think seen a lot of yeah, a lot of movement towards it, because people, right, that's where we're heading. So that's been quite helpful. I'm sure I could ramble on, but I think everybody said everything else, and it's been brilliant to listen and learn from everyone. So thank you.
No, that's great, Daisy. Thank you. And I'm, you know, I really appreciate that. I asked a few people and realised that everybody's just so busy. But so I really appreciate everything you've said, and thank you. At this point, does anybody else want to add anything to what they've heard at all? The floor is open if anybody is keen to add their thought point. Chris.
Claire, thank you. Thank you ever so much, everybody. Very interesting, and making me think I'm a bit thick, if I'm honest, with so many great academics amongst you. But what I would say is that it does remind me and make me think about that poverty is not just about poverty of resource, as in food or money. It's about poverty of relationship. It's about poverty of identity. And for me, certainly within the community as we work, that we need to think about the whole element of that when we are linking with families and community. And food is primarily, I suppose, the end result that comes out, and it's how we, you know, we support in others. So we work in Plymouth, transforming Plymouth together, and supporting families and children at the base level. But I just wanted to highlight those three things: poverty of resource, poverty of identity, and poverty of relationship. To me, it's all of it. Thank you.
Millie, do you want to say something? Thank you for being here, Millie.
Please, thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm in Bath in North East Somerset. There were a few things I've been thinking about this for quite a long time, and as I apologise I didn't get the beginning of the meeting, but what I haven't heard yet is a connection to the bigger picture of actually us living in a largely impoverished food system. So while we're all working, I think, at the level where we're trying to help find support for people at household food insecurity or household insecurity, but you know, that might be around housing or fuel or all sorts of other things. Food is a symptom of that. What we also have to focus on is that we cannot ever solve that if our food system remains largely brittle and impoverished. And we don't know what's coming with what happens with Brexit. From a bioregional point of view, a national point of view, our food security nationally is not okay. So I think it's really hard. I find it very hard to divorce the kind of the part of my job that has to focus at the level of people and households while that's going on in Baines at the moment, without a strategic lead on that piece of work. In my mind, they have to be joined up together. And then there was also something for me that I've been thinking about the words that we use to describe people generally, about being impoverished or disadvantaged or underprivileged. And I'm pretty sure that that's not how the people who experience those things describe themselves. And I have yet to find some good language that resonates with, so people recognise themselves in this discourse when we're talking about them, if you like. Yeah, so those are my kind of, those are my thoughts at the moment, and the struggles I'm finding with the language stuff. Thank you for listening.
I think that you've really hit the nail on the head, Millie. And in fact, you've led me perfectly onto something that I want to show you now. Actually, if I may, I'm not suggesting that people can't speak anymore, but I wanted to show one of the outputs from the Food Equality Project in Plymouth that Lisa worked very hard to produce, because I think Millie's point about the systemic nature of some of the things we're talking about is really pertinent. So if it's very short, but I'd like you just to see it. You may have already seen it, but I'm just going to share it with you now, and hopefully it will work, and hopefully you can hear it. In fact, hold on a minute. I may well, hold on. Sorry, hold on, I need to put the thing on so that you can hear the sound. Sorry, before I do that, let me just, there, optimize, that's it. Sorry, I've done this before and realized that you can't hear the sound. So there we go. Right. Can you all see the walled garden image? I just need to check that. Can someone shout
Yeah.
out yes? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, right.
I've been thinking a lot about how maybe again during kind of COVID time, the walled gardens that people are living within become more and more clear, and what sides of those walls you might be on. I'm starting to see the brown envelopes of cash move around our food distribution systems at the moment, creating these kind of silos and a different type of walled garden. You know, if you're reliant on food bank, it's again at the discretion of a set of people who sit within a walled garden.
Okay. Does anyone want to respond to that at all?
Could you or Lisa just say a bit more about it?
Yeah, Lisa, do you want to say a bit more about the context, if that's okay?
Yeah, hi everyone. Okay, so that audio piece was recorded at a online creative methods workshop. It was actually collaborative collage workshop, which we did in collaboration with Church Action and Poverty. And we asked people to bring along images, found images, anything at all, to do with their experiences of food in COVID and their problems, worries, concerns, and to bring all those to that. Those are the words of Rachel Dobbs, who is based in Plymouth. And what is interesting about these processes, and it's fascinating listening to all the different perspectives on language. I suppose one of the more important things for me in Plymouth on the Food Equality Project, working with those with lived experience, is whose words, and opening up conversations. And we've been using creative methods in Plymouth as a way of doing that. So what you've just seen is a product of creating a space with creative materials and the kind of language and conversations that come from that process. So.
We can share all the outputs again. There were three from that particular workshop. There were three separate short outputs, and I think Matthew features in one of them actually. The star. But yeah, I think I just thought the walled garden, just that vision of the kind of metaphor of who's in control and who's got the power, and I think something that we haven't really touched on in discussions is power. And I think there's a big, and it's quite a lot of the work that I did when with my research working with homeless individuals and having a real depth of analysis around where the power lies in you know, between a researcher and somebody who's being researched, but also on those levels within the food system as well. And I think there's a distribution of power thing that also people feel kind of disenfranchised because of those power differences. So I just thought I'd share that with you as an interesting thing to share. Does anyone, Rachel, do you want to speak? Have you got your hand up?
Yeah, I was just going to echo what you'd said as well there, because it's after the video, then it still creates that us and them, which is back to the terminology, and then us almost dictating what they're called or the words we use, what goes in their food box, whether they get sugar, whether they get tea bags. It kind of, the cycle continues, and again it just reiterates what a lot of people have said, the terminology. And it was a workshop that we had when we were working at Food for Change as well, about terminology and what we call people. It was a multi-organizational project, and we had food banks and community cafes in, and everybody there was using like clients, customers, participants. And at the end of it, we were like, we should really just be calling them people. And so that was what came of it. But it took a long time to get to that point as well.
Thank you, Rachel. Yeah, there's so much to this, and I've like I think it was Millie, I can't remember who, Daisy or Millie, was talking about the appropriateness of the terminology. I spent a lot of years actually thinking about, well, are the people I'm working with, are they marginalized? Are they socially excluded? Are they hard to reach? Are they, and in fact, it just made me feel so uncomfortable using any of the terms, because who am I as a researcher to label anybody? And I think, you know, that I've tried to critique that in some of the pieces that I write, but it can be so frustrating, that whole ivory tower perception of academics thinking that they can label and make those judgments on people, and there's a lot of interesting discussion. I hear Rebecca, did you unmute to say something here?
Yeah, thanks. No, I thought what yourself and Rachel said, and Lisa from the Food Equalities Project, I think, yeah, it's so important. And just as a very small aside, it's a mistake to think that people working in the sector or even academics haven't experienced hardship or haven't perhaps had a sense of what it might be like to worry about how to pay the bills next month. So I'm not saying, someone who's had a bit of insecurity might, I'm not saying they've got full experience of ongoing issues, but it's just, that sort of just highlighting, breaking down the sort of us and them aspect of it.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else want to say anything at this point? Matthew?
Well, I just thought I'd come back in, and it was great to hear Rachel's speech just there as well. I think, and you're right, it's people fundamentally, and I think everybody recognises that. I thought Daisy's metaphor about the sea and everything, we have good times, we have bad times, we have hard times, we might be in need, a bit of need. Did anyone see the Simon Reeve piece about Cornwall a couple of weeks ago that launched our very own Don Gardner, who runs the Transformation Cornwall, Campbell Pool and Red Ruth Food Bank to fame? But Don, what I thought, that was a rare bit of footage. It's worth watching on, I think it was BBC, if you go and find it on iPlayer, Simon Reeve show of visiting Cornwall. But it was quite sensitive how he handled it, but they actually showed Don making a food box delivery to a house, and they had the guy talk to camera about why he was in his situation and how that had happened. And that whole dignity piece, which we all worry about sometimes with food distribution, it was for that kind of telly. I thought everybody I know who watched it thought it was very well done. And I just think, in terms of helping people understand, down on my luck, bit broke, need a bit of help. The language we used at 15 was needs a second chance. And so that was, again, talking about young people needing a second chance. But I just think there may not be a standard language here, but it's about having language which is above all humane and speaks to people in their situations, and that is recognised and is effective. It enables bonds. It's a language that enables bonds rather than alienates. And as Rachel really said well there, with clients, participants, customers, whatever, they're all words that sort of alienate a little bit, as Millie said, disadvantage. Nobody ever describes themselves as disadvantaged. Literally nobody, and yet it is the language of the system. So yeah, I completely agree. The only other small point I want to make, Claire, which, because I may well have missed it with some of the previous presentations, but something I learned working with Rachel, and it's your specialty as well, is nutrition. When we talk about, I think there is probably a space around nutritional poverty, because if you just buy, it goes back to Millie's point about the impoverished food system. If you buy bog standard food, you can do your absolute best to look after yourself. But if the food you're eating is empty of micronutrients, phytonutrients, and goodness, then you are just simply not going to be getting what you need to live a healthy life.
Yeah, indeed. And in fact, I had a few clips that I was going to show, but we've had such a great conversation, I haven't needed to. But one of the clips that Elizabeth Dowler, Professor Elizabeth Dowler, you may know her. She's now retired. She was the real kind of guru on food sociology, kind of public health nutrition guru back in the late 90s and noughties. she's done some great work, and I was going to show you a little clip. I'll circulate the slides, but she defines perfectly that nutritional poverty issue and the way that it's labelled and measured as being quite functional, which in fact it doesn't reflect that whole complexity of some of the issues. But you're absolutely right. There's quality and there's quantity issues here, and the quality of the food is essential, and the dignity as well. She talks a lot about dignity in the definitions that she's come up with, and yeah, that's a really pertinent point, Matthew. Thank you. So I'm aware it's 5. So what I want to do is I want to try and flip it round to the more positive, because I started off with, right, what are all the negative things you can think of? And I think this is where, now Simon sent me quite an interesting blog piece, which I'm going to share with you now. There's just some insights from that. And it was a blog piece that was written by the A-Team Foundation. I don't know who the A-Team Foundation are, maybe you do, but this notion that the COVID and the dramatic increase in hunger across the country have had is an overwhelming combination, but suggesting that the right framing strategies can help to develop understanding of the cause of the problem and its real solutions. And the suggestion here in this blog piece, which you can read, I'll send you the link, to reframe our communications, we can start by avoiding the phrase food insecurity, they suggest. They found that hunger is a more powerful and effective term, increasing the salience of the issue and people's support for the kinds of policies needed to address it. So they carried out a survey and that suggested that people were, in general, the public were unfamiliar with the term food insecurity and often associated it with guilt over food choices, such as trouble sticking to a diet, for example. In contrast, the term hunger helped people to see the issue as a social policy priority. So this suggestion that the reframing of communication is needed, and that they suggest that communicators should be defining hunger as both an insufficient quantity and the quality of food. So going back, I guess, to what Matthew was saying around bringing in that nutrition aspect. Anyone want to chip in at this point? I don't want to run the show here at all. I just wanted to throw a few things in that could kind of generate further discussion. Because the next thing I kind of wanted to move on to really was some of the comments that had been asked about food citizenship. Now, I don't profess to be an expert in food citizenship, but it's a term that resonates with me. And I think this whole, the question about, whether whichever kind of area you're working in, whichever provider you are, whether you're an emergency food aid organisation, a business, government body, NGO or academic institution, we can ask ourselves, how we talk about poverty, how much do we focus on what is lacking versus what we're trying to build instead. And this is where I wanted to flip it and say, this is about the food citizenship. I see it as being more about, what have we got, what assets have we got, what positive things have we got that we can use in order to empower and connect, whereby individuals are not consumers, they're citizens participating in shaping their food environment. So I think this notion of the reframing from and to gives quite a simplistic way of looking at that perhaps, but it maybe gets us thinking a little bit more about how we can better engage people, and that we're exploring the idea that people aren't consumers, that they're participants in the food system as well. So I don't know if anyone has any comments on this or anything they want to share at this point. I'm happy to open the floor again. Silence.
I was just going to, oh, sorry.
I'm going to stop sharing because I can't see you all when I'm sharing. So
I was just going to say that I can't see your slide now, but the top one about people who can't afford food. I think, as other people have said, it's not yeah, obviously citizens participating in a food environment, but it's citizens participating, as Millie said, in an impoverished food environment that has got structural inequalities and issues of power and injustice. So I think obviously that's not a very pithy phrase though.
I didn't have much to say, Claire, but just wanted to say that that slide's really helpful. There's sort of outlining really what I was trying to say earlier. So it's great to have it like that. Thank you.
Well, I mean, I literally, I mean, I'm not going to claim any kind of, I literally copied and pasted it from their blog website. So I don't have any, but I think I have asked myself this question. I've seen food citizenship, flagged in quite a lot of contexts, and I know the Food Ethics Council have done quite a lot of work around food citizenship. Personally, I think it tends to be a kind of ideological way of looking at things, because I think that we all know, if we're working with you know, trying to engage people and you know, working with people with lived experience, as we've Lisa and Vicky have noted with the Food Equality Project, it's you know, making it meaningful and doing it in such a way where people really do feel that they've got equal ownership and agency to be able to feed in equally is quite a challenge. So this whole, some of the things I'm working on currently in research, and I've got a big project, massive project just around the corner, looking at co-production and working with disadvantaged communities to get them more engaged in decisions around food system decisions. I'll be able to say more about that project hopefully a little bit in not too long. It's embargoed at the moment, but I think it's a really challenging thing to do, and I guess it kind of takes me on to, I know that Daisy, the last time we met, one of the ideas that Daisy came up with for the next meeting was perhaps thinking about how we engage people, and whether that would be a useful shared learning event for the new year, about whether there was anything that we felt we wanted to share around that. Daisy, were you unmuted to say something?
I think I unmuted to say something a while ago and then forgot to remute myself. So, but yes, no, I would really value a broader conversation, especially learning from those groups who've done this really well. It's not just about engagement. I think it's that making really meaningful connections with those who are with lived experience, experts in food insecurity, because they've been there, and in connecting those into really meaningful decision-making processes that mean that you're designing a better community food system together. And I think the thing that I had unmuted for, which I'm gonna say, because it's something, it's a challenge that I'm really aware of, is that especially in that kind of food citizenship where you've got those projects which are, you know, community fridges, which their focus is on food waste. It's about reducing food waste in the system. By participating in that, people are helping to reduce waste from stores, and that message I think is really strong. And I'm aware that, as you know, I hope I never get called Daisy from the council, but I am Daisy from the council, and we're wanting to help people get food support, but we're pushing people towards the community fridges like they're a handout service, and that's not what that is. So how do you make sure that you are really communicating the autonomy that comes with projects like community fridges, and then community stores and social supermarkets where there is, you know, it's a membership thing, it's a cooperative, people are participating in the development of their own community stores and making those really prevalent in your community. And that's, you know, in terms of me, I get really excited about community stores because I've seen how they've evolved over COVID. Like, I've been in this job since March, so I've had a very COVID related community food coordinator hat. But the development of community stores where they're not means tested, it's not, the language is about developing a community because this is for us and it's with us, and it's just beautiful. And so how do you make sure that you, especially with those in local authorities, and if you are with a local authority, I'd love to just have a Zoom cup of tea with you to go, how do we balance these things towards wanting to help make sure people are getting the food support, but also making sure we're communicating it in a way that people don't just feel like they're going and getting handouts from here, 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 and here. So yeah, that's what I had. I'm going to mute myself back now, because otherwise I'll just ramble on more.
Sorry, it's really hard when you're sharing screen to see people, so it kind of, you lose your connection a little bit, which I find a bit tricky. Does anyone else want to share anything or speak or add anything to what's being said?
Can I please, Claire? Hello, Cecily here. I did write it in the chat, but just for info, I'm Cecily and I'm the Communications and Events Coordinator at Sustain, whilst Maddie is on maternity leave for the Food Power Project. And I'm new to the world of food and food poverty, food justice, should I call it, because I really like that. So this is really interesting on a personal note, just so I can be aware of kind of what language you are using in ThinkWorks and, you know, don't ThinkWorks. But in terms of that hunger blog, Claire, for me, I might be wrong here and I'd be interested in your thoughts, but I just wonder whether it's too simple, because I know you don't want to make it too complex, but for me, I do think of myself as kind of still a newbie and an outsider in this world. So it doesn't seem to encompass the whole issue, and it makes it look like, oh, they just don't have enough, people just don't have enough food, rather than there's a structural system of poverty causing that. And I don't know whether that's a simplification.
I agree. I mean, I wasn't putting that up as a perfect example. I think it was just an example that had been flagged to me that I thought was quite interesting. I think what is extremely difficult here is, and my own experience of supervising undergraduate nutrition students doing projects around food insecurity, poor things. I really feel for them when I set them a project topic and they think, excellent, you know, this is real life stuff, and then they're bombarded by the evidence of what does it mean and definitions, and it's a real, you know, example of how challenging it is to enter that place, to that space of the noise of all the different terminology, the language. And that's real testimony to me that it's very unclear actually, and it's very easy to misunderstand when you're not well versed in the vocabulary. And I think there's a lot of, you know, depending on, I suppose that, you know, that discussion around depending on which sector you work in, you know, the academic language is slightly different than the NGO or whatever, but you know, it's still, you know, we've had some really interesting discussions. I certainly don't have all the answers, I wish I did, but this is ongoing work. But I'd like to see, I've got that in my mind, whether it's ideological, whether it's a dream or a fantasy, I don't know. I want to see, I really do believe in that, you know, the less top down, the more bottom up, and giving people the opportunity to get involved. And that's where I'm pushing my research and my work forward. It's not without its challenges, of course, because we know that doing that work, co-production work, you know, really doing it well takes a lot of time, effort and resource. And any of you that have worked doing the work with individuals with lived experience, and some of the work that Ben's leading for Food Power, you know, that's a journey. Lisa and Vicky will know it's really hard work engaging people effectively, and for it to appear meaningful, and not that you're just looking for people to be the lived experience expert sitting around the table that might be able to share their perspective. It's more than that, and it's systemic. So before we finish off, I started on a really negative note. Now, some of you missed this activity, but I realized that I did this wrong before. But so the first word cloud that you kindly did was asking about the negative words that you associate with food poverty. And this next one, I've just changed it. So if you can follow the Mentimeter link now, the question this time is, what positive words do you associate with food poverty? Based on the discussions we've had, let's finish this meeting with some real positivity. So if you can put a few words in of some of the things that you've heard that really resonate with you for a really positive future, what would those words be? And you've got 5 chances to put word. I think there's five words that you can put in. So I'm going to share my screen so that you can see this dynamically. Let's just see that coming up. So have a think. That we've got time for you to think, and let's see if we can get your words. Some of the words. Here we go. That's great. I love this dynamic word cloud. It's my new toy. Oh, that's great. Justice, mutual aid, learning, participation, equality. There, yeah, that's good. Collaboration, solidarity, learning, change, support, supporting each other, justice, community, healthy, equality, empowerment, support, citizenship. Yeah, that's well, some great words there. Fantastic. That was exactly, I guess, exactly the note I wanted to end on, because I felt I could have maybe done it the other way around. They always say when you're giving students feedback, you should start with the positive and then go into the negative. But I think that's great. So I guess the next meeting is around how we actually get there, because we've kind of run out of time a bit. Does anyone? I'll share notes, and I'll share the word clouds as well. I think the word clouds are really powerful. Actually, I love this new toy, the Mentimeter. It's free. You get 2 slides for free. Anything that's free is a bargain, and it's really easy to use. So. But does anyone have any last closing thoughts that they would like to share with the group? Ruth. Hi, Ruth.
Hello. Yeah, I'm one of the Bath and North East Somerset councillors, as I wrote. So I have an interest in this. I'm not an expert in any way. I am. But anyway, I was just thinking about, in Baines we have the Food Poverty Steering Group, and that's always slightly bothered me as the name, just the name, because it almost sounds like it's something you're aspiring to, food poverty, whereas obviously it's the absolute opposite. Yeah. So I think language is really important, and I'd never heard the term food citizenship before, and I haven't quite got my head around that. But I think, or food justice, was something that sounds, that's what you're aiming for, rather than just being against something. And I really liked, sorry, where was it? The working together for food justice, being together, because as Millie, I think, was saying, it is it's a systemic problem, if you like, more than just the individual, where I think individuals who are affected, they feel that they're to blame in some way, and so we've got to try and get around that. But definitely I think having a positive language makes all the difference. But you also need, I think, to be careful, this idea of people, we don't there's a danger of alienating the very people you want to help, I think. So being compassionate and sensitive is obviously really important, but yeah, anyway.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Any other words, comments? I think I've really appreciated this. I was a little bit nervous. You never quite know how things are going to go. I've learned so much. It's been really. I feel quite enthused actually by all the conversations we've had, and I really appreciate everybody turning up today. So what I'm going to do is, Vicky has kindly, you can see your fingers going, taking lots of notes in action, and we'll send notes round. And I'll send the word clouds round as well. I think that I love them. I think they're great, and I'll also send a link to the notes. And we are recording. what I am going to suggest as well, if anybody does require any peer mentor support, whatever that might look like, then do get in touch with me. I know a few of you have asked for some various bits of resources, but I'm also going to propose that we maybe have another regional meeting perhaps in February sometime. So if anyone, I mean, I don't want to have meetings just for meeting's sake. I'd like them to be, you know, rich shared learning experiences. Really, that's the purpose of them. And I did wonder, based on what Daisy said, that maybe doing something around how to engage individuals with lived experience or something around that. If anyone has any ideas about what we might cover at the next meeting, then please let me know. Otherwise, I'll just think of something based on what we've discussed and go ahead. So please do get in touch if you've got any inspiring ideas of learning that you'd I mean, we've got funding we can buy in a speaker if we want. You know, if there's anybody you feel that you would really like to hear from, we can try and get, maybe we could ask Megan, Rebecca, could ask Megan to speak about community resilience or something, you know. So in fact, we do have scope to do that. So do think outside the box, and if there's anything that you feel we would like to embrace from somebody outside the region, for example, then let's do it. So I think we're on 1731. Thank you so much, everybody. I'm going to save the chat just in case I forget to do that. Thank you so much, and have a lovely, restful time if you get the chance to over Christmas. If I don't see you all, but please do keep in touch, and if I can help in any way, just let me know. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Claire.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.